So welcome. Yeah, okay. Awesome. Since 38. Yes. Awesome. I'll save myself. Where is that? Okay, awesome. So I welcome you to this panel. My name is Olushola. I'm going to be Queen's University, Canada. I'm not a gender expert. I should state that from the outset. I'm part of a collaborative project working as a research team member for a broader project that involves women, peace and security in Africa. And I'm just essentially attached to that project, working on my own separate project. So I needed to give that caveat, but I'm excited to speak about the work that we are conducting and then also hear about the other presenters. I'll just do a quick housekeeping to know how many people are here, including myself, who is also presenting and sharing the session, the panel on memory, politics, and conflicts. Quite an interesting topic. Yes, so we have Dauda Amos. Let me check online as well. Do we have Dauda Amos here? Dauda Amos. That's a no. So it looks like we have. I'm hoping we can. If we have enough people, we have enough time to speak or enough time to finish it, depending on how much comments we get. So I suspect Dauda Amos is not here. Please let us know when you step in or when she or he steps in the Zoom link. We also have Anne Ojo and Molola Labele. They're here.
They are not here.
No, so we've got to gone. Myself, Oshog is here. That's the third presentation. And then we have Oluwasegun Ogunshaki, State University here. No, here, no. No, interested. What's happening? Gender politics and memory in Kiambwa after the 2008 post-election violence in Kenya. Awesome. That's Njoki Bomai. Are you here? Njoki. Yeah, please. If you don't mind. Yeah. Awesome. So we officially have two presentations. Quite interested. I think I would yield to. If you don't mind, do you mind starting, or do you want me to? Yes, please. If you don't mind. Yes. Hopefully they join us. I'm hoping they'll join us. I'm just starting. I don't want to do African time so we finish on time. Do other things.
So I'm going to use, but I'm trying to teach that I'm not get good. So my name is Dr. Joki Wamai, and I am a assistant professor at the University, United States International University, which is based in Nairobi. And this is the only Kenyan in this country.
I don't think so.
Who else?
I'll find out for you. I've seen one.
I've seen one.
I've seen one. I've met one actually.
I'll show you.
The other one is my Ugandan sister.
Okay, it's the Ghanaian professor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Kenyan professor.
Oh, that I would be very happy to hear.
You're welcome.
Anyway, so I researched on the field of transitional justice. So I got my PhD from the University of Cambridge in 2019. And I wrote my PhD on politics in the International Criminal Court. As you know, the International Criminal Court was highly politicized in Kenya. And so I do research, bits and pieces on this field we call transitional justice. For those who are not involved in peace studies, and also give a short on transitional justice. And so, but today my paper, you find I've done a lot on the politics of the International Criminal Court, the International Criminal Court in Kenya, gender politics. I also do research on gender, women in politics, and also women, peace and security. We see a few things on that. So, but today's presentation is on transitional justice, gender and marginalization in Kiambwa. So I'll give a brief of each of these as we go along. Maybe you will let how many minutes?
10 minutes for now.
But 10 minutes you will raise something so that I know. So the field of transitional justice, for those who do not know, It's part of the greater field of peace building, which is within the national relations politics, right? Field. And transitional justice, can I be heard? Right?
Yeah, of course.
Transitional justice field is very new, I would say. Because maybe the first book written properly on transitional justice was in 2000 by one scholar called Ruti Teitel. Ruti Teitel, he wrote kind of wrote about transitional justice policy. Of course, there's a lot of criticism too. I will not deal with all that, but some of the work I'm doing is actually that I'm quite critical also of liberal peace building, liberal transitional justice. The field of transitional justice aims to address quite distracting. So it aims to address justice and end impunity, and it gained prominence after the end of the Cold War. Scholars like Teitel and Matsei on the transitional justice, the first book maybe to talk about transitional justice in scholarship. So it doesn't mean that before that transitional justice was not being done. So since Nuremberg, which is part of the program in the Holocaust, and I'm also a colonial scholar. If you look at each of our societies, we need to start thinking, how are they dealing with the past after mass atrocities have been have happened, you know? But because we've not qualified written about them, it's almost that we forget that Africans were also dealing with the past. How are they dealing with the past? I think that part we need to write about that. So because of that, maybe invisibility of what we did in dealing with the past. Just stick to the past, like I will come here to Kiamba. So we are still going back to 2000 by which 2010, which is a bit problematic, right? Like the start of this field of transitional justice. But of course, and also there's a reason why transitional justice becomes a thing in 2000. It's because it's the end of the Cold War. So with the end of the Cold War, of course, you know the Cold War politics or bipolarity. Before that, everything was about, what do you call this thing? It's sovereignty, and you don't interfere with people's sovereignty. So it means even after they commit mass atrocities against their own people, nobody, even the UN, did not intervene. If they would intervene, they would call themselves friends or some diplomatic friends, right? So it was not even a program within the UN. But when the 1992 Agenda for Peace report written by Boutros Ghali at the UN, one of the things he set aside or was very clear in this report from the UN, that's 1992, of course, was talking about that we need to start doing conflict prevention, peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace. I think I've talked about peacekeeping, peacemaking, and transitional justice. That is more peace building. So that became now from the UN, of course, a very liberal institution transmitting liberal ideas of peace building to the rest of the world, right? And in this transmission, that's where now these ideas of how do we sort out things, deal with the past after conflict or after mass atrocity or after a dictatorship. Nigeria has gone through many dictatorships, but I'm not sure the people sat and said we need to look at the mass atrocities that happened, say, during Abacha's time, right? Transitional justice. So transitional justice then is a field that aims to address past injustices, and past injustices committed either during when there's mass atrocities, in a dictatorship, or in civil war or war. And the aims basically is to end impunity, build a human rights state, and just make sure we prevent more human rights violations. So it gained prominence, as I said, after the Cold War with scholars like Teitel. And the dominant mechanisms established by the liberal transitional justice practitioners and scholarship to address mass atrocities were mainly four. Because then there were these four main things that if there's a conflict we need to deal with. And one of them is hybrid courts or trials. How do we, or some of what other people call retributive justice, how do you punishment. You have to punish people who did wrong to others. And in Kenya, we had this International Criminal Court that I wrote about from my PhD. Some other countries have done hybrid courts. Others have done, like, what happened in Rwanda. What do you call it? An ad hoc court, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, Yugoslavia, International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Other countries have got the hybrid court with. Others have said we are going to deal with our issues here. And so they are national courts. Yeah, so that's one way, trials. Another is public truth telling. Telling people say that even when you wrong each other with your friend, that friendship, if you sweep things under the rug, yes, we'll be saying hi to each other, but you'll always be like, you no longer feel the way you used to. So truth telling, that process of truth telling, coming to say the truth, this is what I did, or this is how and of course, truth telling has a long history in our communities. Of course, most of our African communities, there was a lot of truth telling. And Rwanda was very clever because this is what they went for in the process called Gachacha, if you've ever heard of Gachacha. And in the Gachacha process, the truth telling process. So if you committed acts of genocide, especially the low level ones, like you stole people's property, you burned people's cows, you would come and talk to the community. Gachacha means the grass. At the maybe local primary school, they appointed the local teachers and local elders to head the process, and they would come and share. I did this. I stole Soke's cow, and because I stole it, and then the community will make a decision on what you need to do. Maybe your family needs to buy what you would call restorative justice. So all these are ways of how do you deal with impunity and how do you get justice after mass atrocities have been committed for the victims and survivors of the violence. And that's at a very local level. So transitional justice should not always only happen at that level. It's at very many levels. At that local level, which never happened in Kenya, and then at the very high level, right? So where you saw Ruto and others were taken to the International Criminal Court in Netherlands at The Hague. And of course, because they were the leaders, they made sure they are elected to become the president, went to the AU, told the AU, you know what, this is neocolonialism. And of course, it's a very nice rhetoric. And even go back for convince, of course, the voters. Why are you sending our people to The Hague? And the people voted them as president. And of course, when they became president and deputy, you can imagine, your guess is as good as mine. There was no way the ICC would get any evidence from the court in Kenya, or not the court, the national police, because the police, the people who have the records are the police. They, of course, never submitted any. Maybe the deaths of people, the people they found organizing. So all these things are very important. Public trials, public truth telling, and it can be in various forms. Truth, justice, and reconciliation, so the justice part. Truth Reconciliation Committee, some countries have said we do not want to deal with justice because of the justice after mass atrocities evokes so many tensions. Some people will say, no, if we deal with justice, we are going to bring so many tensions. Let's not deal with justice now. So it could be a question of what we call as in scholarship sequencing. Should we deal with justice now or in the future, right? Are we likely to have a more lasting peace now that people are so divided now or in the future? Or should we deal with everything now, justice, so that justice can be a precursor of peace? So all these are dilemmas that peace builders find themselves into after any peace building process. And so TJRC, you can see one doesn't have a jail, like the one in Kenya had a jail. We tried justice, but we've never found justice. The one in South Africa was TRC, no jail, no justice. And they said, let's just reconcile, move on with our lives, right? Without dealing with that. So, and then of course, the third one, the individual and collective reparations, which other people call restitution. How do we return you to the original place you were before the conflict? How do we restore you? Or before the dictatorship? Some of you know, especially with dictatorships, how much mass atrocities are committed. Institutional reforms, even if you get all these truths, or you take all these protocols, as long as you don't reform the institutions that created this in violence, as long as you don't reform institutions that create human rights violations, like the police. In Kenya, because the police are very, they do not respect human rights and Bill of Rights. So if you don't reform the police, if you don't reform the judiciary, if you have a corrupt judiciary, if you don't reform electoral reforms, so all the people, they rig them in, all the shady people are rigged in. Of course, you're not likely to have justice. And the last one, which is the focus of my presentation, public memorialization, memory. The question of memory. How do you make sure you deal with the questions of memory, right? Because if you don't deal with memory again, that one will present other issues. And memory helps us preserve also the wrong that happened. And it's very important. And I know with Christians, we keep saying, let's forgive and forget. So it's a very interesting also dichotomy between, of course, the Christian ethic, and that's where all this let's just move on comes from, versus no, let's deal with the past. If we don't deal with the past, how do we move on? So there are two conflicting and tensions between the two. So transitional justice, so that's what we'll be focusing on. So I hope I just was just painting the kind of landscape of transitional justice to see, so that you can see memorialization within the context it operates, at least within this liberal peace building framework, within the four types of, or four forms of transitional justice, and then public memorialization as one of them, and how these women and men in Kiambaa are making sense of their past after mass atrocities happen. Transitional justice as a new field of study has provided concepts and discourses largely informed by the Nuremberg trials. And Nuremberg trials are the trials that happened after the Holocaust in the 1940s, late 40s, after Hitler. And that's also, it's problematic because in many ways, we carry on, or the UN even, or the so-called transitional justice frameworks created, universalized a very unique way of dealing with the past that Germans chose, but universalized it for everybody. And uses that as a template to go everywhere where mass atrocities have been committed as a template. And so that's part of the problem. People asking, even people keep asking, how come Kenya defeated, I don't know, the ICC? Okay, fine. Because, of course, you're using a very liberal template that works in Germany, that may work in the West, but not necessarily in other contexts. And I'm not saying that I'm against trials. I actually believe in them. But then you need to think through the context. So transitional justice as a field has provided these concepts, largely informed by this liberal transitional justice perspectives and based on the legacies of the Nuremberg trials in Germany. So increasingly, transitional justice has focused on the liberal idea that constructs private and everyday practices of dealing with the past as having no influence on transforming a liberal society, quote unquote, into a liberal one, because it's really based about this liberal idea. Liberal ideas of human rights and that kind of thing, market economy, which is best attained. So dominant transitional justice practices advanced by the United Nations and many of these practices. And of course, they'll come to a national government and say, you people, of course, the national government that has gone looking for them because they need the money. People need to, you want to deal with your past, this is the way forward. And the liberal template, according to Teitel and others. So this idea of everyday practices, which is what I look at in Kiambaa, people fail to focus on everyday practices to make sense of their past. And so which is best attained through dominant public performances of trials, truth-telling, collective preparations, and public memory. So the dominant practices believe in these public truth-telling, public collective preparations, public memory. So I argue in this presentation and paper that examining everyday gendered individual and community practices of dealing with the past atrocities in Kiambaa, which is a Kenyan context, reveals situated practices of memorialization, while also unsettling the dominant liberal assumptions about how society should memorialize their past, not to their loved ones, right? And so I will not go into the theory. I think I've spoken a bit of And I will go to looking at memorialization and the case and that case study. And so looking at this, memorialization is broadly defined as the process of preserving and commemorating memories or events of the past committed during past periods of mass atrocity. So the process of preserving and commemorating memories, and various scholars theorize about memorization. But very little has been done linking memorialization, gender, and transitional justice. Because most of the time when we think about memorialization, even if you think about, don't forget about mass atrocities. If you want to think about, say, Nigeria or whichever country, the big monuments. So there are two things, of course, memorials and memorialization. Memorialization as a process, of preserving and commemorating the past events of people. And then memorials and memories, three words that are so intertwined. So with memorials, of course, they could be events or they could be sculptures. So if you think of even here in Lagos, I don't know whether you have sculptures, but even when I look at sculptures in Kenya, it's like the former president, the people who are memorialized, historical figures most of the time, male historical figures, events that are memorialized again. Where men were involved. Look at Ghana and their money with the, I don't know, are they called the six, Nkrumah and those other men, on the money. And yet there were women who were involved in nationalism, actually, because I did a lot of research on this kind of women. But you never see them in these spaces of memory, whether it's the money or whatever you choose. So at that national level, if you look at the micro level, at the everyday level, which I really love to look at ordinary people, how did these people so make sense of this horrible incident that happened to them? So memorialization has often preserved and memorialized male elites, often male elites also, because even male non-elites, nobody cares, who include historical figures, and even historical victims will be memorialized, but most of the time you'll find they are male. And so many times we don't look at gender and memory, or rather transitional justice, gender and memory. And memorialization, of course, is very, very important. And gender influences it in very, very, very ways. One is through, of course, representation and recognition, right? Because certain genders have always
just do 1 minute and let's wrap up so we can take questions.
So certain genders keep featuring in memory, whether it's men, of course, the subject matter, the themes chosen for memorialization are also influenced by gender perspectives. So gender-based violence, which women go through during atrocities, rape, nobody, and not just gender, and not just women, because now we are also looking at gender from non-binary perspectives, LGBTQ, especially in these our societies that are so, against LGBTQ individuals. So there's a lot of violence is committed against them. But in the new generation, new space of thinking about memory as a subject matter, you not find these people's issues within memorialization or memory. So design and architecture. The design and architecture of memorials again reflects gender norms and values. Who are those you find incorporated? And the aesthetics, inclusion and visibility. Yeah. So lack of all these people in public memory, the lack of gender perspectives even informing that. And so looking at, just give me 3 more minutes and then
I don't think we can give you that much. I want us to take questions so you can have more time to respond through some of the parts you've not been able to capture in your response. I think that's a better idea. Because I'm not sure. I'm worried that 1 or 2 of the presenters might turn in, and that might put us in a situation of yeah. So let's take questions so that we don't kill the time in case somebody comes in eventually.
It's just the case study. I just wanted to show.
I would like to go into questions now, actually, because you've run way into 20 minutes, almost 30 minutes, in fact. Great presentation. Can we give a round of applause to the presenter? Thank you very much for your presentation. Can we have questions? I've got a couple of questions myself, although memorialization is not my field entirely, but in ways that help us to understand your conceptual ideas and the methodology that is being applied. It's good to explore some of these ideas. So we'll just raise your hand if you have a question. make it quick, and then we can proceed from there. Thanks. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Independent researcher. Talking about memorialization, I deal with some of this. I went to, I did a tour in Ghana some time ago, and it was a museum, and they say this is the head of Nkrumah. And during the crisis, that the sculpture was destroyed, and a woman preserved the head. You know, a woman preserved the head. What's the name of the woman? And now the preservation of this head was, I mean, she was able to achieve this, and this head is in the museum, but the name of the woman is not mentioned. That's number one. Number two, talking about memorialization and word, you know, when you talk about tension, we talk about, for instance, do we really have cases of where tensions have been resolved, especially in Africa, after those crises? Then thirdly, I want to ask if the place, what do you consider as the place for universal force of justice in this, especially if we can't really address the fact that injustice during war has really been dealt with. So have you considered the fact that, you know, like you said, Christianity and all that stuff, oh, just give it for God and all that stuff. What about the idea of universal force of justice? Thank you.
Sorry, it's okay. So talk about tensions.
Yeah, I'm not
Is one person Is one person online or two?
A case study of any place where in Africa, especially in Africa, where those courts of justice, where they have that are set up after wars. I mean, the cases of where they have taken place and how it has created peace after the war.
I think that's quite a couple of questions, so you could respond to that perhaps, and then we can take another round of questions. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I want to hear first.
Okay.
Congratulations with the presentation. But the risk of this challenge, how do we, you know, get to assess your presentation out or now?
I'll share it with you.
Assess. Okay, we can take questions now, and then I think I'll take my question in the second round of questions, hopefully. Okay, you have a question? Please go ahead.
So thinking about, you mentioned on sort of a minor level versus on a national level, right? Then you mentioned something about LGBTQ individuals who are not memorialized necessarily, but those people are memorialized within the LGBTQ community. So I just wanted to hear you elaborate more on what it means to have those kinds of people memorialized on a national level, because we also have a lot of tokenism that we deal with and exceptionalism. And so I wouldn't necessarily say someone being memorialized on a national level is always an amazing thing.
This is a good time to take your response. Please go ahead. Please respond to the questions if you have a response. Or you want me to ask my question? Anyway, I'll just ask because I'm trying to save time so that my question can be relevant. I don't know if you could respond to the extent to which distortion of facts plays out in the process of memorialization. How much of this fact gets distorted in ways that privileges certain categories of people or gender. I wonder how much of your work responds to this element of distortion of facts through the process of memorialization or through the process of documenting those facts in transitional justice.
So essentially, thank you. So thank you everybody for your questions. Chelsea and
Shola,
thank you very much for your insightful questions. So one, it's okay, you asked a few questions. Tensions, is there a case study where courts of justice have created peace after conflict? And that's a very good question. You know, that one we can even go philosophical. But if you look at, like I was thinking, what happened for the Kenyan case, we did not go through the court. because I don't know, I don't want to go into the details, but you know what happened with the ICC in Kenya. The elites frustrated the court, but also the court failed to understand this issue I'm talking about, the context, the templates they use, the lack of thinking about the context. So that's a very different case. But also, what courts are we talking about? So there are different levels of courts, as I said, at the international level, or the ICC, where we have the ICC. And you know how we've had problems with the ICC of selectivity, where we have just maybe Africans who've been selected. But of course, there's also a reason why it's only Africans, because our courts are don't work really, you know. But if you could prosecute people in our own courts, we wouldn't need to go to, especially elites, not people. So, but I think courts of justice, even though the peace may not be visible at that time, over a long period of time, but that's what we're talking about. Transitional justice, or even just courts, even without thinking about them within a transitional justice context, are there to end impunity. If you end impunity, if people know that I can speak and I will not go to jail, or I can protest like you protested in EndSARS, or we are protesting in Kenya, and I'll not be shot dead, then that way, or that policeman will be taken to court and jailed for killing, for murder, right? Then that way, of course, it creates peace in the long term, especially if it's within, you know, ethnic conflict, or even just conflicts against, like what we have right now in Kenya, the state versus the people, the elites versus the people. The universal force of justice, right? What did you say about universal force?
For instance, where justice, I mean, where the courts, you know, like you just said, that the people frustrate the processes of those courts, and they never get to really achieve,
of course.
So, and then, you know, people say, let's read it for God, let's read it for God. So, either we're reading it for God, or you know, you made a scenario, you gave a scenario of people going to report to the grants. I don't understand that. What you
Gachacha. Gachacha is
that should also be trying to invoke the universal force, you know, the cosmology to deal with the people that committed those crimes. Yeah. So I want the opinion.
Okay, so like gachacha, although I was translating literally, gachacha means grass, sitting on the floor, grass, and then sitting. So I was not saying they were looking at the grass. The people in Rwanda, because they are, you know, after the genocide, 1 million people had been killed. So you can imagine, to kill 1 million people, probably 800,000 had committed the crimes. 800,000, they didn't have the space for that for the jail. So what did they do? They put them in 3 categories. The ones who have committed very low level crimes, you know, stealing this and that small thing. And then the second level, where now, so that second level and first level, they would come to the grass in the community, sit down together. I don't know whether you have such a thing in your community, sitting down together to talk. And so that sitting in the grass, gachacha, so they're able to then truth telling, this word to say the truth, I stole who, I took their car or their whatever. So yeah, sometimes exactly what you would call poetic justice. And that's why, and actually I hope I liked the previous presentation in this room. They were talking about this mystical spiritual world. And sometimes, yeah, you hear somebody has committed, they did bad things to people, mass atrocities, even these dictators or elites. And then you hear, oh, all their children are drunk, or all their children are horrible people. Later, who never became anything. And people are like, you see what is poetic? I don't know, you're calling it universal justice. I call it poetic, but I will use your name, universal force of justice. So sometimes, and I hope if we're going to decolonize, also thinking about justice, we need to start thinking about this kind of thing, even studying these universal forces of justice and seeing. It's true, I agree with you, Chelsea. That LGBTQ or less marginalized genders, of course, the male gender is the main one that's really memorialized everything. So marginalized genders, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's women, nobody minds you. But within their communities, yes, they memorialize themselves. So I totally agree. Sometimes you may take them to that space. But even with tokenism, at least it will give hope to other marginalized genders to know, look, one of us is now in this space of public memory. It means our lives are not matter. And looking at your last question, distortion of facts, I totally agree with you. Especially with elites, and elites coming from, again, dictatorships, committing mass atrocities. One of the things they do is distort memory. And we have a very good case study in Kenya, especially by the British. So, Kenya, the most mass atrocities with the, what do you call it? Colonial, British committed some of the worst atrocities in Kenya. And one of the things the British did was distort. The British are very good in keeping records. So when at independence, they distorted, they threw away some of the files, especially where they committed they had horrible ways of, like Hitler's methods of, torturing people. So they distorted facts so that, through the process of documenting and deleting, so that we can get rid of those memories.
All right, thank you very much. We would please give a round of applause. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to pen that because we are short of time. I'll just move. I'll keep my presentation for the last so we can just wrap that up in a quick, with the few time we have. But we'll move quickly into the presentation from Oluwasegun Ogunshakin, Migration, Securitization, and the Consequences of Weapons Proliferation and Post-COVID-19 Nigeria. Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. My name is Oluwasegun Ogunshakin. I would love to share my screen.
You have 15 minutes in total. I'll allow you when it's 5 minutes to time.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good.
All right, so I'll be presenting migration, securitizations, and the consequences of weapons proliferation in post-COVID-19 Nigeria. My name is Oluwasegun once again from the Department of Peace and Security Studies, Ekiti State University, Ado-Ekiti, Nigeria. So as we know, Nigeria is currently dealing with greater security issues than at any other time. And in the northern region, there are issues of smuggling, as we know that migration is a continuous thing, which has always been issues across the world. And the northern part of the country, we have issues of smuggling with the issues of either farmers' conflict, the issues of kidnapping, the issues of militancy, the issue of the Boko Haram insurgency. And also in the southern part of the country, we have the issues of armed militancy, adoption, illicit issues, armed robbery, separatist movements, and different diversity issues that occur in the country. And migration, as we know, remain an important phenomenon in human existence. Our mobility, our movements cannot be stopped. We move every day, we migrate every day. But what has migrations is a question. What has migrations provide? As migration provided the needed security we need, has it added enough development to the Nigerian sector, or has it brought more issues of insecurity to the society? Now, on this case, I will be considering some research questions which will be answered because of this my presentation. What is the nexus of migration securitizations in post-COVID-19 Nigeria? What are the causes and consequences of weapon proliferations in post-COVID-19 Nigeria? What are the challenges of addressing influx and also weapon proliferations in post-COVID-19 Nigeria? And what are the best practices of improving security in Nigerian borderlands? These are questions that I would love to present in the course of this presentation for the next 12 minutes. I adopted a text research inquiry into issues of migration, securitizations, and the consequences of weapon proliferation in Nigeria. Content analysis was made from secondary data that were collected from various sources, including academic journals, government reports, media outlets, and the internet. Now, let's look at what does migration mean. According to National Geographic 2010, define migration as the movement of people, individual, from one location to another, either for temporary sake or for permanent sake. And migration comes in different forms. It comes both in internal and also as external. Now, looking at security, what does security means? In this study, security simply means the effective ways of protecting lives and properties of people. And according to Igomero and Akuchomba, 2013, explain that security entails having a steady source of money, being free from criminal activities, and also not suffering from psychological injury. And that comes into the place of protection. Now, looking at migration secularization, it means it refers to framing migrations issues in terms of security threats, how migration is bringing security threats to a nation, and how it is creating either crime, terrorism, or economic bonding. So that is the meaning of migration securitizations. And what does weapon proliferation mean? It means illegal transfer of weapons from one set of owners and users to another person, according to Yakub in 2021. Going to the theoretical framework that I use in this study, I use the Stouffer's theory of mobility. Stouffer is an American sociologist who introduced this theory, especially to the aspect of explaining the essence why people move, either from a short or a longer distance, and whereby movement of people either brought opportunities or either brought issues of the issues of crime or solutions to a country. And he correlates this to the aspect whereby, yes, many people are looking for opportunities. Many people are looking for, ability to ensure they enjoy their life, and also to have a lot of, opportunities. So, and he explained that mobility will remain. People will keep moving, whether the nation love it or not, whether the government love it or not. And this is the essence why my research brought the issue of migration secularization, how it affects security of a nation. Now, findings and discussions based on my content analysis. Now, what is the nexus of migration secularization and security in post-COVID-19? After the COVID-19 in 2021, 2020, 2021, 2022, we have a lot of issues even before then, where people move, where there was a lot of shutdown just to prevent the outbreak of coronavirus across the country, and also how the government of the former president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, have to make mention that there should be a kind of a closed border, just to prevent either the spread of COVID-19, and also to prevent, smuggling, and also to promote effective patriotism of our agricultural products. Now, and also the issues where there are a lot of illegal migrations, which are really affecting the nations, especially in terms of either farmer conflict, whereby we have a lot of migration downtown from the Chad region, from the Niger and other neighboring countries like that. Now, the government sees this, that migration is creating an insecurity in the country, and therefore there is need to shut the border down. Now, this is as a result of porosity of the Nigerian border, and also the aspect of our fragility of how border being safeguarded against illegal migration, against criminals. Now, moving to the next question, what are the causes and consequences of weapons proliferation in post-COVID-19 Nigeria? Now, according to the report by the West African Democracy Radio in 2023, as discussed by Dr. Aminu Idris, Nigeria is believed to be a source of 300 million 350 million of the 500 million illicit firearms, that is weapons in use throughout West Africa. That is, Nigeria has a lot of illegal possessions of millions of weapons. And this is creating a lot of issues in the country. And there are many main suppliers of these arms. Some of them are made locally. Some of them are being bought illegally without license. Now, let's look at the case of the issues of the militancy in the Niger Delta, the issues of the Boko Haram sect. All these are creating a lot of issues whereby they possess different kinds of arms. Now, what are the challenges of addressing the inflows of immigration and the weapon proliferation in post-COVID-19 Nigeria? Now, there is this statement that was derived from one of my articles that I reviewed. It says, can the illegal inflows of immigrations and weapon proliferation be tackled? That is a question. And it's a question that altered every Nigerian today because of the persistent security difficulties and the government incapacity to ensure safety and security in the nation. And is it possible to secure people's lives and property? Now, this is a question that needs to be answered. Illegal immigration and illegal inflows of people, even without being checkmate, these are there, and also weapons moving from people to people without proper checkouts. Now, what are the challenges now of addressing this? Number one, Nigeria has a weak security system. Yes, the government are doing a lot in providing security, but still, the fundamental issues facing the country is that there is a weak security architecture. The issues of porous borders and also poor documentations of migrants. All these are challenges facing the country. Now, my conclusion and before recommendation is that this study has examined migration securitizations and the consequences of weapon proliferation in post-COVID-19 era in Nigeria. After the pandemic, there are a lot of illegal immigrations. There are a lot of issues where migrations creating insecurity in the country. Our recommendations, according to the challenges I discovered, I was able to analyze, is that security agents need to be more proactive. And even for them to be more proactive, there is need for strategic alliance. There's need for training. There is need for safeguarding the borders against illegal immigrations into the country. And also improving the nation's border infrastructure, which the government, especially the current government, needs to fund a lot of money to ensure the border has been safe, have been safe from crimes and also illegal migration. Also, corruptions should be tackled. Implementation of frontier technology, as we are in the age of artificial intelligence, where people should be able to, where the government needs to be able to know who are the people moving in and the people coming out. These are very essential. You can't just burst into a country without being properly checked. The government needs to engage in the frontier technologies in managing the Nigerian border. And also the government should take the securitization of national border as a serious matter. So thank you so much for listening.
Sounds good. Great. Thank you for your presentation. We're just right on time. We're just going to tell you that you have 4 more minutes and then you're wrapped up. So thank you for keeping to time. I will follow the same order with the last presentation. We'll take a couple of questions and then I would move on to the last presentation, which is myself. Questions. I've got a couple myself, but I'm not a discussant. I'm just chairing. And so I don't want to overwhelm the panel. Questions. Okay, I think I'll start off with mine. Questions?
I may understand. Again, it's okay. My name, Dr. Sorry. Okay, I may understand the reason why you title your paper as the COVID paper. But my concern is, has the situation been different before COVID? The weapons. Okay, we'll say so. But I just think it has always been like that. That's number one. Number two, when I look at your images, they seem more like a cultural. You want to say something?
Yeah. The issues of weapon proliferations has been even since the post, when Nigeria has its independent. When we have our democracy, when we achieve our democracy in 1999, but it keeps growing. Even as it is right now, we all know how inflow of illegal weapons, people possessing it, especially the headers, and also the terrorism in the country. So I'm not saying that there has not been that, but it has increased as we progress. That was what I meant.
Okay, the next question is, if it has increased, what was the impact of those weapons before COVID and the difference after COVID?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Now, if you look at the antecedents of how weapon proliferations, beforehand, Nigeria never had these issues of, before 2009, Nigeria never has the issues of Boko Haram, the issues of Edas farmers conflict, the issues of Niger Delta criminalities, and other stuff like that, like the Biafras, the unknown government and stuff like that. But as we progress, there was an increase. People started having possessions of arms. Because when you look at the issues of, for example, the issues of the Boko Haram, the issues of bandits, Nigeria never has these issues, even before 2009. Yes, we have issues of crime, but not as so volatile, not as so pronounced currently. And this is as a result of, our border being so porous, being so fragile. So that is what I meant. Okay.
Okay, so the point you have just made now is what I wanted to make, because seemingly there's sort of the number of crises we were having before now has reduced. That's I'm thinking, because before the new government came in, there was a lot of there was a lot more, but now it has come down. So we have an explanation for that, because we are saying there's proliferation of weapons, but we're not seeing the impact. Because sometimes issues of proliferation of weapons could just be political statements, that it's not made for people. That's why I'm asking that.
Okay,
yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, true. You are. That was why I said that during the course of my explanation. I said the government have been trying enough, but there still need enough to be done, whereby Nigeria will be more safe. Yeah, we are not hearing much of the Boko Haram issues, but I would love to tell you that there's still a lot of activities of bandits, especially in the northwest part of the country. The government are trying, but more need to be done, in preventing the inflow, the outflow, of possessions of arms by people. Yes, the government are trying. I'm not saying the government are not trying, just to ensure there is security, but there is still need more to be done, to prevent, the issues of illegal possessions of weapons. And also one more thing, I don't know, probably some few months ago, where the government, where the custom, then the Nigerian custom, were able to seize, a trucks, containing weapons, that was being moved from, especially in the north, whereby they were being, seized from people trying to move them into the country. To be sincere, please, there is still movement of illegal weapons, whether we like it or not. But the government is just trying to cope to ensure that this does not create security issues in the country.
Thanks for your response. I will go straight to my questions as well. Just a quick, for me, I'm always thinking, when I listen to presentations, I'm always sort of transcribing those presentations as though they were, as though I was reviewing as an examiner. And my comments would be in ways that help you take those, in ways that help you sort of, hopefully, I'm not insistent, hopefully help you take that paper beyond sitting on the desktop into something that is publishable in a meaningful outlet, right? Not just so that it's adding to the global conversation on migration and securitization, right? And so my first comment would be, I did not necessarily see how you made that transition. Before I go into theory and methods, which is not really relevant right now, I did not really see how you made that transition and connection between migration, securitization, and the weaponization of, what's it again? What's the word you used? Yeah, weaponization, weapon. Anyways, I did not see that transition. I thought it was, perhaps it's in your work, but I thought something still felt missing in how you connected migration and securitization with weapon massification or weapon proliferation. And that, for me, perhaps springs from how limited your theoretical framework is. Your theory, for me, did not necessarily speak to, right? It speaks to how migration comes about, the push-pull factors, but it doesn't necessarily bring in the securitization angle of that conversation into the mix. So how you are able to situate that theoretical framework within or accommodate the securitization argument in your theoretical framework is perhaps why there's this disconnect between a lack of overlap in that, how you transition from one conversation to another. The other point I would like to raise, I've talked about theory while I was making my point. I've also talked about, I'm now talking about, you made quite eloquent contribution around challenges. And for me, I also thought that before the challenges, because it appeared to me from my transcribing of your transcription of your work, it appears to me as though there's still no argument that connects that brings the bigger picture into frame. Before you begin to talk about the challenges, there must be some ways in which you are presenting a meaningful argument that you can then draw out the challenges from in ways that help to improve the quality of your work. So I thought, more importantly, it wasn't very clear what your essential argument is beyond looking into the challenge, which is very, very eloquent and essential. I thought that you can create a solid argument, which is, for me, which is quite unique, around the migration securitization argument that you're trying to provide and bring to fore in the context of weaponization, mass, whatever it is called. And so that's that. The other part would be the extent to which you are, I think the other lady spoke eloquently, spoke about that, how you situate the work within a post-COVID context is still not clear. I think it's important, otherwise it was very fanciful at some point in the 2020, 21, 22 to throw in post-COVID into a paper, but now not so much. So if you're still going to maintain or retain post-COVID into that title, you need to situate from a methodological point of view why your work is critical within a post-COVID context. And I think that's why she wasn't feeling the vibe of your work in the context of how it ties into a post-COVID. What has changed prior and subsequently after COVID in terms of weapon proliferation? I keep using massification in my head, but I wish you all the best. Any other question before I move on to my presentation, which I'm excited about? Yes.
I'm not concerned about the idea of migration. Weapons, small weapons, so that needs to be classified. And the other thing about the migration is from which region? If it's in the north, it's the Sahel, and that's the whole area. If it's in the south, you might need to think about the incursion by militants and the rest. So again, it's something to think about. That's what I mean. Yes.
And then you did mention the proliferation of arms, that before the president's government was much earlier, but looks like since after the kind of this government has been issues. I'm thinking the main need to find out if yes, why is reduced after the government came? What if it is a political game? Because the politicians, from our experience in Nigeria, was that share the arms for those who are going to campaign for them, those who are going to enforce the counting of violence. So if they take back the hands, that's if they do, otherwise they'll allow those who are holding those hands to hide them. That's the really reason why you see. And for security agencies to declare that they have seen truckloads of arms, these are things that always occur and reoccur. What happens to those seized guns? Have they ever told us? Should there not be the research to find out what happens to those seized guns? Where do they go after the war? Where do they go? So maybe you need to find out. It is only we can only rely on researchers like you to know the truth.
I think we can have a quick response from you to any of the comments or feedback or questions, and then we can wrap up from there. Thanks.
Yeah, for the issues of what my brother said concerning the issues of migration, either from the Sahel, from the down here in the south, proliferations of weapons comes across all borders in Nigeria. There is no exemption, and that is the reality. And then looking at it very well, Nigerian borders generally are much more porous, which we all know. There are a lot of illegal, even unrecognized border posts, which allows a lot of inflow of illegal people, movement of weapons, and also for the issues of the weapons I'm talking about. It can either be light, small, or medium. So I just generalize it, weapon generally. And even weapons does not really mean guns. Some can be even the normal, crude weapons, which are being used, to commit crimes. And also going to what the other person said, of course, I'm going to add this to part of my research. I'm going to go back and look at it. Why is there, kind of security in quotes, whereby there is no much inflow of weapons, especially by hooligans, by criminals, probably due to political reasons or political games that we are witnessing. So I'm going to definitely look into this and make my paper to be more enriched. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thanks for your presentation. A round of applause. We do appreciate your time. I would quickly move into do we have anyone online? I hope not. Okay, I can stand up. I will be quick. I will try to be quick. So good to stand. So good afternoon or good evening. It's like I said earlier, I'm not very eloquent in this work because it is a work I'm part of as some kind of work kind of thing. I'm working as part of the project. I'm part of a project that's been led by Professor Brian Clarkey, Professor Yolanda Booker, and Professor Stephanie Martel at Queen's University. So I'm essentially a research coordinator, research assistant in that project. And part of the project is themed No Women, No Peace, Gender Advocacy and Regional Security. So essentially we are, where do I start from? So essentially this is essentially a WPS, what we call Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and is an attempt to, we are basically trying to, if I move into my presentation, I just want to recap all of this. The overarching aim of our work is to understand the variations in the adoption and implementation of the UN-led WPS agenda across regional contexts. And so there are 3 regional contexts in which we are trying to look at this, which is NATO, in the EU, ASEAN, in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the AU. So the objective is essentially streaming the 3 pathways without having to go into much details. First is to demonstrate the mechanism through which WPS, if I have time, I'll go into what WPS means. There's UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and a couple of other resolutions that speaks to women, peace and security agenda, essentially. I would maybe highlight some of those points if we have time, but it's important that I capture some of the work or some of the ideas that is connected to this work. We're demonstrating the mechanism through which women, peace and security considerations are integrated into regional organizations' day-to-day practices. I've already mentioned the institution that we're looking at, the multilateral institution that we're looking at, which includes NATO, ASEAN, and the AU. Essentially, like I said, first is to look at mechanism through which WPS considerations are integrated within. For instance, you have some regional organizations like the AU that have a gender equality norm, right? And then they also have the women, peace and security agenda or continental framework, right? And so there's a question of how much of integration, how much overlap exists between the broader gender equality norms from the AU, where I'm part of, where my work is located in, and the broader gender equality norms of the EU, or the women, peace and security architecture of the EU. So we also want to look at explain the regional differences in the articulation and implementation of WPS agenda and facilitate cooperative research by building comprehensive database of WPS guidelines across NATO, and ASEAN. And so essentially all we want to do as part of this research collaboration across different researchers, principal investigators, and across different research support researchers that are working within this structure, is to shed some light in the implementation challenges and contested meaning embodied by the WPS agenda across regional context, and like I've explained, so this is an ongoing project, and there are series of already published work that are already part of this project. So there's an ongoing contribution, which is work in progress that I am working on along with Dr. Booker, Yolanda Booker, who is leading the AU part of this project, right? And so the title of that work, which is a sub-work within, is an ongoing, in fact, it's part of this one in Nigeria, is to gather some data at ECOWAS in ways that help us to contribute more robustly to this work. So moving on to the exact work I'm doing right now in relation to WPS and in relation to this project I've just mentioned, is we are looking at how the institutional complexities within the AU informs the implementation of the global WPS agenda in Africa. And what we mean by this is that if you look through the works of Tieko, for instance, Thomas Tieko, we talked about 3D IO framework, where the argument essentially is that an international organization is composed of different bodies or three phases, right? Or three dimensions that includes the member states, the epistemic communities, and the bureaucratic structures within that organization. So that you will find, according to him, you will find that structure, that three-dimension framework of most international organizations, and we apply this framework. We are hoping to apply this framework essentially in understanding how institutional dynamics helps to facilitate in ways that facilitate, enhance, or disable, right, the implementation of WPS agenda in Africa. And so essentially, like I said, there's data is being gathered for this particular work, and hopefully the data that is gathered by interviewing, I have quite a list of questions, interviewing ECHO. So like I said before, and I've said this before, there are different levels of the WPS agenda. It's in terms of application, construction and application in Africa. For instance, in Africa, we have the continental framework, which is more of the regional continental framework action plan, I think. And at the regional level, at the sub-regional level in West Africa, SADC and the likes, you have what you call the regional action plans, REX, regional action plans, yes. And then at the national level, you have the national action plan. So all of these are ways in which the global women, peace and security agenda is being replicated across regional, sub-regional, and national frameworks. And so the extent, what we are essentially looking at is the extent to which there is uniformity in the implementation of the WPS agenda across regional, sub-regional, and national frameworks, national structures globally. And so the key context of this work, this part of the work, like I mentioned before, is to look at how the institutional opacity of the AU informs the ways and manner in which the WPS agenda is being implemented. Essentially, the WPS agenda, just to recap, is some kind of resolution, UN resolution, of course, that sought to ensure the inclusion of women in post-conflict peace processes, essentially their participation in conflict and conflict resolution and post-conflict peace processes, essentially in the security mechanism of the states and of multilateral institutions. And there are other subsequent resolutions following UN security, UNSCR resolution 1325 of 2000. There are subsequent resolutions since then that have been designed as part of the WPS agenda in a global WPS agenda. So moving on to some of the context that informs our preliminary, what you call our processes of preliminary assumption. The assumption is that the extent, the institutional opacity, which I might explain if I have enough time, the institutional opacity within the AU in terms of how the different structures, different organs, different units within the AU are saddled with implementation responsibilities of WPS in such ways that you do not exactly know who is in charge of what. So it's not essentially a hierarchy of implementation structures, but a diversity of or the evolution sort of implementation structures. And so we're not assuming, we do not want to assume that this devolution of implementation frameworks within the AU enables the proper implementation of WPS in Africa. But the hunch is that there's an extent to which it enables, facilitates, or disables the implementation of the WPS agenda at least in Africa. And the template within the AU is not the same template that we have in the EU, for instance, or ASEAN, for instance. And so the question is, what does the context of the AU have that informs, if you understand how the AU works, essentially you have different organs, you have the special advisors, what's it called, special envoy on women, peace and security. They have different nomenclatures of responsibilities, or within the general gender, women and gender architecture of the AU, there is some kind of opacity within that institution. And through additional data, both at the sub-regional level within ECOWAS and at the AU level, which we're also doing, we can have more arguments to make in terms of how the institutional complexity within the AU helps us to understand implementation patterns of women, peace and security agenda in Africa. And I said earlier on that part of the reason why there's some sort of confusion within how the AU implements its women, peace and security agenda, according that's designed by the UN, is based on the fact that you also have, on one hand, gender equality norms, Maputo protocols, and the likes. On the other hand, you have the other architecture that supports women's participation in peace processes. That sort of, in some ways, we cannot really tell if there's an overlap or not. I think I've done 10 minutes. There's an overlap or not in how the design and implementation of WPS agenda is being implemented. Yeah, so essentially that's the work. That's what we are doing. The methodology, essentially, that, like I said, is part of what we're. So what I'm doing right now, as part of the work in wrapping up, is to map, which is also part of what we're doing in the broader work of WPS. What is the broader pattern of the literature on WPS agenda? And from that broader pattern, we see that the extent to which the institutional mechanism within the AU is being studied in understanding the implementation patterns of WPS in Africa is on the study. And so, of course, there's been some work on global, local norm dynamics, implementations, issues, and the lack of localization of WPS in Africa, the extent to which I'm sure she can, my colleague here can talk more to that. But what is missing from what we think that is missing from the literature is a study of looking into the black box of the AU functionality. The argument we're making here is that the way the AU is designed and composed informs and affects the way WPS is being implemented in Africa that is unique and different from how it's been implemented at Asian and at the EU level. And we hope to make a solid argument from that based on using, like I said, Tieko's thesis on 3DIO, which is three-dimensional international organization that talks about how institutions are built around three phases of the member states that compose of the institutions that do all the official duties, the bureaucratic structures within the AU, within the international organization, and also the epistemic communities that includes civil societies and the likes. That is the threat construct. The methodology is still being mapped out, and I'm happy to take feedback or questions that would help us to map or develop further arguments from what we have on ground so far. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yes, please. You could help me.
Well, I can sort of.
Yes, I think you can maybe help me share this part while I take a breath.
Oh, okay, fine. Any questions? I wanted to ask you a question as I chair. Any questions? I do not want to abuse my power, new power, yes?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lofgren. I'm actually a historian, so not a political scientist. But I find what you're trying to do actually rather fascinating. And you're obviously at the beginning of this project. But do you have any hypotheses, or do you have anything kind of some preliminary findings in terms of the African or in terms of the Nigerian situation that you're examining as part of this project?
Okay, thank you. Do you want me to respond now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it's a part of every research that I'm particularly always very interested in. I want the argument to be clear from the onset, even though it's preliminary. In fact, I've highlighted this in some place. I hope I can find that quickly. Yeah. So the preliminary argument essentially is that the multi-layered institutional dynamics within the AU. Of course, I need to situate earlier. I did say earlier that this is an institutional or multilateral institutional study. So we are not necessarily looking at national local context, but we're looking at how this policy is being implemented. It's a UN policy that is being implemented across the world, regionally and then nationally. We're looking at the regional aspect of this work. And so the preliminary hypothesis, and I qualify this as preliminaries, is essentially an assumption, is that the multi-layered institutional dynamics within the AU with intersecting mandates of various units, organs, and actors offer both challenges and opportunities for effective consideration of WPS, AU WPS agenda. And so we're not, I've left that a little bit open-ended in ways that help us to situate the opportunities that this opacity of the AU implementation framework or the AU institutional framework operates, and the opportunity that this might offer for how WPS has been implemented in Africa.
I understand your argument, but I guess what I'm still unclear on is, what is your evidence? How are you going to go about proving this argument?
Yes, that's the stage that we are in now, which involves data gathering both at the AU level and at ECOWAS level. I'm actually going to ECOWAS next week to get a bit of insight about what is the connection between how WPS is being implemented sub-regionally and also is there a connection between what happens in ECOWAS? Somebody else is doing the AU part, which would then tie up all of the arguments together in what we find, depending on what we find. But we do know, based on previous research and also based on some conversations we had with Professor Tieko, who is also more like a consultant in this project. What we do know is that there's some opacity in how the AU operates. There's some confusion. I won't call it confusion. There's some lack of clarity in how the AU WPS implementation framework, we don't want to use the word architecture because it's a bit hierarchical in itself, it's a bit confusing, but we use the word how it's the AU's institutional structure has been designed informs the implementation patterns of WPS. And we think that because of the way and manner that different actors and role players and units are saddled with WPS agenda implementation, that can in some ways inform some of the constraints or some of the confusion with implementation of WPS, because I did mention earlier that there's some confusion about how the broader, because there's an AU gender equality norm, which is the Maputo Protocol, and there are quite a number of them actually. And there's still the continental framework for WPS. And so where is the implementation patterns or implementation framework for WPS? How does it overlap with the gender equality framework of the AU? And in fact, is there any kind of implementation of WPS beyond the rhetoric in the documents of the continental framework? So that's the understanding that we have, is that to answer that question in simple sense, the understanding we have is that there's an institutional complexity in how the AU operates, and that can inform, that informs how the AU implements WPS protocol for agenda rather, not protocol.
We only have 7 minutes.
Okay.
You wanted to ask something? Your hand was raised, no? Me. Any other question? Okay, so maybe I just want to, so that I let you conclude that chair, of the panel. The in AU, I don't know whether you're aware, and it's not even a question for me, it's more of a comment. And at first I like the work, of course I know Buke and Tycoon very well. So, but I like that you've chosen to focus on the institution, because there's a lot that has been done on the individual. I've been writing on WPS in Kenya. And one of the things you'll find within the AU has a parallel WPS program called FEMOIS. And they are always back to this decolonial agenda. Why should WPS, some people, of course it was women activists and also the UN, bring the WPS, which is one of the most difficult frameworks to implement, even at a very local level. Not because it's a difficult, but because it kind of does, what do you call it? Like reinventing the wheel. And many of these women are so exhausted. There are so many frameworks you're implementing, beyond 1325. There is CEDAW, you have to report to the committee. The 1979, there's Maputo, Southern Africa, there's the Solemn Declaration. Here there's an ECOWAS framework also for women. And then now the WPS one for 1325, which again brings, so there's a huge problem when it comes to implementation.
Yeah.
But so I think the AU in its wisdom or whatever, women like Benita Diop and all these people who run WPS, they designed now FEMOIS, and those are some of the tensions you may find, because they say, no, why are we implementing this UN thing? As the AU, we're already there, we've been doing well, we have our own FEMOIS, and then now the tensions between the two. But there's somehow, because the AU has no funding, they need money from the UN. They will still continue with WPS. So I'll stop at that. And then
good.
Conclude.
Thank you. It's like I said, I'm not an expert in, but gender is my second field, but I'm no expert in gender. But I'm happy to. I always find joy in inserting myself into unknown spaces, and that's how we learn collaboratively and expand on our own work as well. Like you said as well, there is of course an issue of implementation in WPS globally, and how it's been how it transitions from the global level to the national level, which you've spoken to, and that's what we are interested in. And we are picking the institutional dynamics of the AU to explain that problem with implementation. I think that's one way for me to simplify the crux of our work. There's implementation problem and that implementation problem can be explained from the way the AU itself operates, which we think operates in an opaque manner. That there's a lot of lack of clarity in who is responsible for what, who reports to who within the women, peace and security or gender architecture of, I don't like to use the word architecture, but within the gender framework of the AU. That's one way to put the whole work we're doing, particularly for this particular project I'm involved with, and the data that we're gathering for that. Thanks for the comments. And thanks for the comment. Thank you very much. Thanks for attending the panel. We appreciate the time. Thanks for your time. Have a lovely evening. For coming.